Before the sun rose over the Sahel on a mid-August morning in 2025, something extraordinary unfolded in the dark. Helicopters cut through the silence. Drones traced invisible circles in the night sky. On the ground, units advanced toward a cave complex that, according to intelligence, hid more than weapons. It hid a network, a lifeline of violence that had haunted villages for years. By dawn, the balance of power in West Africa looked different. Was it a lucky strike, or the mark of a new military doctrine taking root? Supporters call it the moment Burkina Faso proved it could fight on its own terms. Critics warn that one victory does not yet equal a safer future. But everyone agrees. The operation has left questions too large to ignore. Who funded the cash uncovered? How far does the network reach? And what will happen next along borders already under fire? Welcome to Africa Bright Dawn, where we look beneath the headlines to tell Africa's story with clarity and courage. Subscribe now and turn on the bell, because in the next few minutes, we will walk through what really happened in that cave and why the world is still talking about it. In every conflict, there comes a night when the theory of leadership is tested against the weight of stone and silence. For Burkina Faso, that night came on 13th of August 2025 at precisely 04:23 in the morning along the jagged border with Mali. Weeks of intelligence gathering had led to a single set of coordinates. Russian satellites had traced unusual movements in the hills. Chinese surveillance drones confirmed the outlines of a fortified cave system. Local defense volunteers whispered the names of paths long known to shepherds. Turkish electronic warfare units promised to cut off communications at the critical moment. At last, the threads of sovereignty, partnership, and preparation converged. The operation began from the air. Drones mapped the terrain, marking entrances and exits in real time. Helicopters struck not to destroy the caves, but to block escape routes and cripple weapons depots. Then came the ground advance. Small teams of elite Burkinabè forces, their body armor heavy but their steps measured. They did not charge blindly. They moved as though every meter of rock might hold a trigger. Behind them, armored vehicles stood ready, engines low, waiting for the signal to close the last gaps. Inside the caves, resistance was fierce but short. Reports describe a disciplined assault. One entrance breached, fighters pushed back, munitions seized. The toll announced by the military was stark. 107 insurgents eliminated, 0 Burkinabè casualties. Weapons included rocket-propelled grenades, machine guns, explosives of foreign make, and more than $500,000 worth of international currency. Among the finds were encrypted devices and contact lists linking the caves to networks across Niger, Mali, and beyond. For the government in Ouagadougou, the meaning was immediate. It was not just a tactical success. It was a demonstration that the armed forces, under new doctrine, could plan and execute without foreign boots on the ground. For citizens weary of insecurity, it was a glimmer of vindication that the sacrifices of reform and mobilization might finally be bearing fruit. For regional partners in the AES bloc, it was a signal that coordination across borders could yield more than slogans. But questions rose as quickly as the celebratory headlines. Could the numbers be verified? Would the intelligence haul be used to prevent future attacks, or merely announced as proof of competence? What safeguards were in place for civilians living near the frontier? To supporters, the cave raid was a hinge moment in West African security. To skeptics, it was one bright flare in a night that remains long. Still, the symbolism was powerful. A cave that once sheltered men who thrived on fear had been turned into a site of evidence. A case file against international financiers and recruiters. A border that once felt porous became, at least for a morning, the line where state presence returned. And a leader who had promised African solutions to African problems now had a headline to point to when asked for proof. Yet every operation, however decisive, is a question in disguise. The real test comes not in the hour of breach, but in the weeks that follow. Can patrols keep the road open? Can schools reopen without guards at the door? Can markets breathe without fear of reprisal attacks? These are the measures of durable security. The cave was cleared in a night. But can a nation clear the shadow that lingers after years of violence? And will this victory mark the beginning of a sustained turn, or just a moment in the storm? Every military report speaks of phases. On paper, they are numbered neatly, 1, 2, 3, 4. But in the field, they blur into a single rhythm that either holds or breaks. At the caves of the Sahel, the rhythm held. Phase 1, Reconnaissance. Turkish drones circled silently, watching without announcing themselves. They traced footpaths, marked sentries, and confirmed weapons caches tucked inside the stone. Phase 2, precision fire. Helicopters swept low, their missiles cutting off exits rather than collapsing the cavern. They struck fuel reserves and storage depots, robbing fighters of both escape and supply. Phase 3, the ground assault. Special units advanced with measured steps. They used night optics to read the shadows and body armor to absorb stray rounds. Rather than storm in a rush, they peeled back the resistance chamber by chamber. Phase 4, clearance. Once the shooting stopped, engineers and intelligence teams moved in. They collected rifles, explosives, foreign-marked grenades, hard drives, and stacks of currency in dollars, euros, and pounds. Each item was more than contraband. It was evidence, a thread to trace into wider networks. The climax of the raid was not the echo of gunfire, but the silence that followed. No casualties on the government side, no hostages lost, no repeat ambush. For a moment, the state had rewritten the script that insurgents had relied upon for years. The echo began immediately. In Ouagadougou, officials framed the operation as proof of a turning tide. Supporters hailed Captain Ibrahim Traore as a leader who could match words with results. Across the AES bloc, partners in Mali and Niger studied the raid as a model for joint operations. Within hours, similar sweeps were launched using shared intelligence, eliminating dozens more fighters and closing additional hideouts. But echoes travel in more than one direction. Citizens did not hear only celebration, they heard questions. Was the intelligence properly verified? Would the captured devices be analyzed quickly enough to prevent retaliation? Could the military sustain this level of precision, or was it a single performance difficult to repeat? Markets reopened cautiously. Parents sent children back to school, but with watchful eyes. Trust is not restored in a night, it is rebuilt day after day. Internationally, the story divided commentators. Some praised the sophistication of the operation, noting that African units had combined advanced technology with local knowledge without relying on foreign troops. Others cautioned that insurgents adapt quickly and that a dramatic raid might provoke new tactics. Brief occupations of towns, ambushes on roads, or propaganda aimed at sowing division. Media cycles magnified the tension. Headlines spoke of victory. Editorials reminded readers that insurgency is not ended by one success. In political terms, the echo of the caves reached parliament, civil society groups, and neighborhood meetings. Some voices demanded oversight. How were the targets chosen? What protections were guaranteed for nearby civilians? Who would manage the evidence chain? Others called for further offensives, arguing that momentum must not be wasted. Between these poles lies the delicate balance of a state under pressure, to advance without overreaching, to reassure without boasting, to protect without oppressing. For communities near the border, the echo was measured in simple acts. Could a trader risk a trip to market? Could a clinic expect medicine deliveries on time? Could a farmer walk the road without fear of checkpoints? Each yes added to the sense of progress. Each no reminded families that the struggle was far from over. The climax of the cave raid proved that doctrine, training, and technology could converge successfully. The echo that followed revealed the larger challenge, translating tactical brilliance into strategic credibility. A raid can capture weapons, only consistent governance can capture trust. If one night's success can echo across a region, can it also echo across months and years? The answer depends on what comes next, how the state manages consequences, prevents retaliation, and convinces its people that the silence after battle is more than temporary. Every raid leaves two ledgers. The first is military, fighters counted, weapons seized, strongholds cleared. The second is civic, markets reopened, classrooms lit, families daring to sleep without packing a bag. Both must be read together, or the story is incomplete. Military consequences. For insurgent groups, the raid was a blow that resonated far beyond a single cave. Networks scrambled to evacuate other hideouts, fearing they too were compromised. Planned attacks were canceled, recruitment slowed as young men questioned whether the cause was still viable. Panic spread through cells in Mali and Niger. Within weeks, follow-up operations in those countries, using intelligence gathered from the caves, neutralized dozens more fighters and closed additional routes. For once, the insurgents were reacting, not dictating the tempo. But military success carries its own risks. Retaliation is part of the insurgent playbook. Security analysts warned that the next wave might not target soldiers in the field, but civilians on buses, markets, or schools. A state cannot declare victory too loudly, or it may invite the very backlash its people fear. Sustained patrols, quick reinforcement, and intelligence sharing across borders became urgent priorities. Civil consequences. The human ledger is always heavier. In the weeks that followed, 12 villages previously under insurgent control were reported liberated. More than 8,000 civilians returned to their homes, reopening farms and reclaiming markets. Roads once too dangerous for aid convoys were gradually reopened, allowing food, medicine, and teachers to reach communities again. A village chief was quoted, "The soldiers came like lightning. Now our children can go to school." Yet not all consequences were bright. Communities such as the Fulani, long targeted for recruitment by extremists and equally long suspected by neighbors, faced renewed scrutiny. Too often, counterinsurgency victories risk fueling suspicion against whole groups. Reports from rights monitors stressed that safeguarding civilians, especially minorities, was as important as battlefield triumph. Without it, the cycle of mistrust could deepen, feeding the very insurgency the raid sought to break. Political consequences. In Ouagadougou, the government presented the raid as evidence that reforms under Captain Traoré were working. For supporters, it was vindication of a sovereignty-first doctrine. African armies with modern tools and clear will can succeed without foreign boots on the ground. For critics, it raised questions about transparency. How would the captured evidence be used, and what systems existed to ensure accountability? In Parliament, debates unfolded. Some called for more resources for the military, others demanded stronger oversight mechanisms. Civil society groups pressed for guarantees that future operations would prioritize civilian protection. The tension between security and rights was visible, but it was also a sign of democracy alive, even in the midst of conflict. Media consequences. Across Africa, headlines celebrated African military excellence. Social media trended with phrases of victory, generating billions of impressions. Diaspora communities abroad echoed pride, calling the raid a symbol of resilience. But international press was more divided. Some praised the professionalism of the operation, others warned against declaring success too soon, noting that insurgencies are long wars of endurance. In the daily churn of Burkina Faso news, the story became both a source of unity and a platform for debate. Citizens wanted to know if their roads were safer, if their clinics would remain open, if the intelligence would lead to more prevention than punishment. These questions are not cynical. They are the heartbeat of a society measuring whether political promises translate into protection. The double-edged sword. Victories change expectations. Citizens now look for continuity. If one cave can be cleared, why not the next? If one road can be secured, why not the highway to the capital? The government has gained credibility, but with it comes responsibility. One lapse will be judged not as a single failure, but as a betrayal of new hope. This is why the consequences of the raid cannot be read only in numbers or in pride. They must be managed as a process. Building systems of intelligence sharing, training units for restraint, engaging communities in dialogue, and protecting those at risk of being scapegoated. If those steps are taken, the raid may indeed mark a turning point. If not, it may be remembered as a bright flare that faded too quickly. Question for the comments. If you could choose just one priority for the government after such a victory, what would it be? Stronger border patrols, more protection for schools, faster delivery of aid, or reconciliation programs for vulnerable communities? The consequences are clear, but the choices are still open. Can the state turn a tactical win into a strategic shift, or will the echo of the cave fade before real peace takes root? No operation of such scale remains a local story for long. Within hours, the news crossed borders and entered the global bloodstream of commentary. In African capitals, leaders spoke of solidarity. In Bamako and Niamey, officials praised the raid as evidence that the AES alliance could deliver more than communiques. It could change realities on the ground. From Dakar to Pretoria, voices framed it as a moment of continental pride, a reminder that Africa's own resources and resolve can set the terms of its security. Yet across oceans, the tone was different. Western media outlets carried the story cautiously, some highlighting the success, others questioning the numbers. Editorials warned against drawing conclusions too quickly. Analysts pointed out that insurgent groups are resilient, often absorbing blows and returning in new forms. In Washington, Paris, and Brussels, the silence was telling. Official statements were restrained, offering generic support for stability but avoiding direct praise. For governments long accustomed to playing central roles in Sahel security, it was an awkward moment. A regional force had acted decisively without them. Think tanks and policy forums in Europe and America picked up the debate. Some argued that the raid validated a shift towards sovereignty-first strategies, where African states rely on selective partnerships rather than heavy foreign presence. Others feared it could weaken Western influence, leaving room for new actors, Russia, China, Turkey, to shape outcomes. The raid became not only a military talking point, but a geopolitical one. Who gets to be the preferred partner in Africa's security future? For the diaspora, the story struck a more personal chord. Across social media platforms, Africans abroad expressed pride, relief, and a sense of vindication. Many said it was refreshing to see Africa in global headlines for competence rather than crisis. But even in these celebrations, questions emerged. Would this success be sustained, or would it be a lone chapter in a much longer struggle? The challenge of international perception is double-edged. On the one hand, global recognition can bring investment, training, and diplomatic capital. On the other hand, scrutiny can expose weaknesses, inflate expectations, and frame victories as anomalies. The Burkinabè government must navigate this carefully, balancing pride with patience, confidence with humility. Above all, the raid forces a wider conversation. What does partnership mean in the Sahel today? Is it measured in the number of foreign troops on the ground, or in the quality of tools, training, and respect for local command? For the region to move forward, it must insist that sovereignty and solidarity are not contradictions, but companions. Abroad, the raid has been called everything from a breakthrough to a gamble. At home, it has raised hopes and doubts in equal measure. The final question remains: how can this moment be converted into a roadmap? One that secures not only borders, but also the daily lives of citizens across the Sahel? Victories are fragile if they are not followed by vision. A raid, however brilliant, is only the first stone laid. The road ahead must be paved not with headlines, but with habits, the daily routines that make security feel ordinary again. Securing the ground. First, borders must be treated as arteries, not lines on a map. Patrols need to be regular, not occasional, information shared, not hoarded. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have already proven that when intelligence flows, raids succeed. The next step is to make that flow permanent, building joint operation centers, harmonizing pursuit rules, and creating a culture of trust between commands. Sovereignty does not mean isolation. It means partnership on equal terms. Protecting civilians. Second, communities must be at the heart of every plan. Victories can turn bitter if they fuel mistrust among neighbors. Special attention must be given to groups long caught in the crossfire, such as the Fulani. Protection, dialogue, and reconciliation programs are not luxuries. They are the soil in which long-term peace grows. A nation cannot claim to be secure if parts of its people feel abandoned. Investing in institutions. Third, civilian institutions must be strengthened alongside the army. A road cleared of insurgents must also be cleared of potholes. A school reopened must be supplied with books as well as guards. Clinics need medicine as much as security perimeters. When ministries act in concert, the gains of soldiers become the gains of society. Shaping the narrative. Finally, the story must be told responsibly. Propaganda thrives on exaggeration. Credibility grows with measured truth. Each success should be reported with accuracy, each setback acknowledged honestly. Trust is built not by perfect performance, but by transparent performance. If citizens feel respected, they will grant patience. If they feel misled, even the greatest victories will lose their weight. The road ahead is not short. It will test budgets, discipline, and political will. It will demand humility as well as courage. But if the momentum of August 2025 is nurtured rather than squandered, it could mark not just a moment, but a movement, a new chapter in how the Sahel secures itself. The cave was a battle. The road is the war. Can Burkina Faso and its partners now build a peace as deliberate and disciplined as that raid in the dark? The answer lies not in the past, but in the choices still to come. The Sahel story is often told only in shadows, of attacks, of displacement, of grief. But August 2025 gave us a different kind of chapter, one where planning met patience, where local knowledge joined modern tools, where a state too often doubted found its footing, if only for a morning. The raid was real, the numbers striking, the evidence significant. Yet history will not be written by a single night in a cave. It will be written by what follows, by whether families feel safe enough to farm, to teach, to trade, to pray. There is reason for anger. Communities have carried the weight of insecurity for too long. Young lives have been lost not in battle but in classrooms denied, in clinics without supplies, in markets closed by fear. Promises of reform have too often been broken, leaving scars of mistrust. There is space for regret. Victories have been declared before, only to fade into disappointment when insurgents adapted, when institutions stumbled, when leaders lost focus. The Sahel knows the sting of hope deferred. But there is also room, essential room for hope. What happened in the caves proves that African forces can achieve precision, restraint, and effectiveness on their own terms. It proves that coordination within the AIS alliance can deliver real results. It proves that leadership, however contested, can shape a new horizon. For those who follow Ibrahim Traore news, the meaning of this moment is still being argued. Yet even amid debate, one fact remains. A state dared to act, and for a time the ground held. Across Burkina Faso news cycles, citizens continue to ask the right questions. Will this success be sustained? Will it translate into schools reopening, clinics resupplied, roads kept safe? These questions are not cynical. They are the compass of a society demanding more than slogans. And they are questions worth repeating, because accountability is the heartbeat of sovereignty. If this story has given you something to think about, subscribe now and turn on the bell. Share this with someone who cares about Africa's future, told honestly. And tell us in the comments, what one investment, schools, roads, health, or reconciliation, would most change daily life where you live? Because in the end, the cave was not just about insurgents. It was about us, about the kind of future we choose to build. For all who read Ibrahim Traore news or follow events in the Sahel, the verdict is still out. But one truth is clear. Victory is not a single strike in the dark. Victory is the dawn that follows, the day when safety feels ordinary again.